The wilderness had always been a sanctuary for the creatures that called it home. The towering trees, the whispering winds, and the soft murmur of rivers had provided for generations of black bears. But this year was different. This year, the forest had turned against them. Winter had lasted too long. For months, snow had buried the once fertile ground. Streams that once flowed freely were now frozen tombs. The berries that should have sprouted in early spring were absent. The insects that usually buzzed through the warming air had not yet emerged. The mother bear had seen hard seasons before. She had survived bitter winters and lean summers. But this was worse than anything she had ever known. She had given birth to her 2 cubs during the coldest nights of the season, curled deep inside a den that had barely shielded them from the elements. As the weeks passed, she had nursed them with everything she had, her body growing weaker as her milk supply dwindled. She had hoped that by the time spring arrived, food would return, and she would be able to teach her cubs how to survive. But the land remained barren. And her cubs were starving. The stronger of the 2 still managed to stumble after her, though his legs wobbled from weakness. The smaller one, her second-born, her delicate cub, could no longer walk. His tiny body, once full of warmth and life, was now cold and motionless against her chest. She could still hear his faint breathing, but it was growing weaker with each passing hour. She had done everything in her power. She had searched for food in every familiar place. She had wandered farther than ever before, risking encounters with other predators, hoping for even the smallest meal to sustain them. But there was nothing left. She had lost weight rapidly. Her once thick coat was patchy, her ribs visible beneath her thinning fur. And yet, despite her own hunger, her pain did not matter, only theirs did. She could feel the life slipping away from them. And she refused to let them die. That was when she caught it, a scent on the wind. It was unlike anything in the forest, rich, warm, and strangely inviting. It carried hints of fruits, grains, something that made her stomach ache with longing. But beneath that enticing aroma was another scent she knew all too well: humans. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to turn back. She had been taught to avoid them. Humans were unpredictable, dangerous. But she was out of options. Her cubs were dying. With a final glance at the silent, unyielding forest, she made her decision. She would go to the humans. She would beg for their help. The night was dark as the mother bear left the only world she had ever known, stepping toward the place where the humans lived. She moved cautiously, her ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound, her massive body exhausted but determined. The wind carried strange scents, the metallic tang of human structures, the unfamiliar aroma of their food, and the odd, chemical smells of things she didn't recognize. It was nothing like the crisp, earthy scent of the forest. The stronger cub still tried to follow her, his tiny legs trembling with exhaustion. Every few steps, he collapsed into the dirt, panting, his strength nearly gone. She stopped, turning back to nuzzle him. She gently pushed him with her nose, urging him forward, whispering silent encouragement the way only a mother could. He had to keep moving. The smaller cub lay limp in her mouth. She could no longer hear his breathing. Fear gripped her heart. Was she already too late? No. She would not let that thought take hold. She would not lose them. They pressed on. The trees grew thinner, the darkness lifting to reveal an alien world ahead. Glowing lights flickered in the distance. Structures, tall, unnatural things with flat sides and sharp edges, rose out of the landscape. The smells were stronger now, overwhelming her senses. A mixture of food, metal, fire, and human presence. She hesitated, scanning the area for movement. Her cubs were too weak to run. If the humans attacked, she wouldn't be able to fight back. But she had no choice. For the first time in her life, she stepped beyond the boundaries of the forest and into the world of humans. Jennifer Carter's mornings had always been predictable. She woke before sunrise, brewed her coffee, and watched the forest from her kitchen window. It was a peaceful ritual, a moment of quiet before the day began. This morning, as she stood waiting for the coffee to finish, she glanced outside and froze. At first, her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. A bear stood at the edge of her yard. But something was wrong. The bear was painfully thin, her ribs visible beneath her patchy fur. Her massive frame swayed with exhaustion, her powerful legs barely holding her up. And she wasn't alone. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she saw them, two tiny cubs. One lay completely still, his fragile body motionless in the grass. The other barely moved, his head lifting weakly before dropping again. Jennifer's heart clenched. She had seen bears before. But never like this. Never this desperate. Then, the mother bear lifted her head and looked directly at Jennifer. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another. Jennifer expected to see fear, or aggression, or wildness. Instead, she saw something that shattered her heart. A plea. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone and dialed. "Sarah," she whispered. "There's a mother bear in my yard. And she's asking for help." Within minutes, Sarah arrived. Then Dr. Michael Chen, a wildlife veterinarian. Then the neighbors. Word spread. People came, not out of fear, but out of compassion. The cubs' condition was dire. They needed food, water, medicine. The mother bear watched as the humans worked, her weary eyes filled with something almost like trust. Sarah and Dr. Chen moved carefully, laying out small portions of emergency food. The mother bear nudged her cubs toward the food before taking a single bite for herself. Jennifer wiped away tears. Even in her own starvation, the mother was still putting them first. The smaller cub, the one who had barely moved, lifted his head and took his first bite. A collective gasp spread through the crowd. For the first time since their arrival, there was hope. In the days that followed, the town came together in a way no one had expected. Wildlife organizations sent supplies. Volunteers ensured the feeding was controlled and safe. And through it all, the mother bear stayed. She began to trust them. She watched them. And when her cubs grew strong enough, she led them back to the forest. But before disappearing into the trees, she turned one last time. And in that moment, as if she knew exactly what had happened, she gave them a final, lingering glance. A silent thank you. Jennifer pressed her hand to her chest, tears falling freely. The mother bear had come in desperation. She had left as a survivor. And her story would never be forgotten. As the days passed, the small town that had once been just another quiet dot on the map became a beacon of compassion. News of the starving mother bear and her cubs had spread beyond Jennifer Carter's backyard, beyond the first shocked whispers of neighbors. It had become a movement. Wildlife conservationists, local volunteers, and even officials from the regional wildlife reserve stepped in to help monitor and support the mother bear's recovery. But the journey was far from over. The mother bear, now known to the town as Hope, had grown more accustomed to the humans who had saved her cubs. But she still carried the weight of her struggles. The long months of hunger had weakened her body, and though she was eating again, her strength would take time to return. The real test lay ahead. Would she be able to return to the wild? Would her cubs, tiny survivors of a winter that had nearly stolen them away, be strong enough to learn the ways of the forest? Or had they already bonded too much with the humans? A delicate balance. Dr. Michael Chen, the wildlife veterinarian who had been among the first responders, stood near Jennifer's backyard, watching Hope from a safe distance. The bear had started to regain weight. Her once sharp ribs now less pronounced beneath her thickening coat. The cubs, too, were stronger, their movements more playful, their once dull eyes now sparkling with energy. But there was a problem. "She's staying too close," Dr. Chen murmured, his brows furrowed. Jennifer, standing beside him, followed his gaze. Hope still lingered near the outer edge of town, never venturing too far back into the wild. Her cubs, though more energetic, had not yet learned to forage for themselves. If they remained dependent on humans for food, they would never survive in the wild. The town's dilemma. The question was no longer whether the town should help the bear. Now, it was whether they could let her go. It had been Jennifer's yard that had first become a sanctuary. It had been Sarah, the wildlife rehabilitator, who had coordinated food stations, ensuring that Hope and her cubs received nutrition without becoming reliant on handouts. It had been Dr. Chen who had designed the careful feeding schedules, monitoring their intake and overall health. And it had been the people of the town, ordinary men and women, children and elders, who had gathered, cried, and rallied together, pouring their hearts into ensuring that these animals did not die. Now, the hardest part of all was coming. They had saved them. Now, they had to let them go. Releasing Hope. Dr. Chen called for a meeting at the local community center. "This is going to be hard," he admitted, addressing the gathered townspeople. "But if we keep them here, they will lose their ability to live independently. We have to help them find their way back to the forest." A murmur spread through the room. Jennifer clenched her hands together, her heart aching at the thought of Hope and her cubs leaving forever. She had spent hours watching them. She had seen them nearly die. And she had watched them come back to life. The idea of letting them walk away into the unknown felt unbearable. But she knew it was the right thing to do. The rehabilitation plan was set into motion, gradually reducing human interaction. Volunteers who had been monitoring the bears would increase their distance, ensuring the bears did not grow dependent on people for comfort. Creating natural feeding sites deeper in the woods. Instead of leaving food near homes, wildlife experts set up natural foraging stations far into the forest, encouraging Hope and her cubs to search for food on their own. Introducing natural hunting and foraging techniques. Experts brought in logs filled with insects, simulated berry patches, and even introduced small prey movements to stimulate Hope's hunting instincts. The process would take weeks. But it was necessary. Hope had come to the town out of desperation. Now, she had to remember who she was. The final test. Jennifer watched as Hope hesitated at the edge of the woods. The town had stopped feeding her. The food stations were now miles away, deep in the wilderness. Would she go? Would she stay? Her cubs whimpered at her side. They were still young. Still dependent. But something inside Hope had changed. Her body was stronger. Her eyes were sharper. Her instincts, once buried beneath starvation and desperation, were returning. Jennifer held her breath. And then, Hope took her first step back into the wild. A mother's instinct. For the first few days, Hope remained near the forest's edge. She returned at night, sometimes watching Jennifer's home from the distance. It was as if she knew she had been given a second chance, as if she remembered. But as the days passed, she went deeper. The cubs began to follow her lead, learning from their mother how to find food, how to climb trees, how to navigate the world they had nearly lost. Jennifer missed them terribly. The yard felt empty without the tiny, playful cubs tumbling through the grass. Without Hope's massive, watchful presence beneath the oak tree. But she knew, this was how it was meant to be. Hope had come here to save her babies. And now, she was teaching them to survive. The last goodbye. One evening, weeks after their slow return to the wild, Jennifer took her usual walk through the woods. She knew she wouldn't see them. Hope and her cubs had been fully released now, monitored only by tracking signals and occasional camera traps. She was wild again. And that was how it was supposed to be. Still, Jennifer found herself whispering into the trees. "Be safe." Then, a sound. A rustling in the distance. Her heart leapt. She turned, and froze. There, standing at the tree line, was Hope. Her golden brown eyes locked onto Jennifer's. Jennifer swallowed hard, tears filling her eyes. This was goodbye. Hope stared at her for a long moment. Then, ever so slightly, she dipped her head. And with that, she turned and disappeared into the wild. Jennifer let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Hope had come back one last time. Not for food. Not for help. But to say thank you. The legacy of Hope. Months later, reports from the wildlife trackers confirmed the miracle. Hope and her cubs were thriving. They had moved deeper into the protected lands. Hunting, foraging, and living exactly as they were meant to. The town still spoke of them often. Children told the story of the mother bear who had asked for help. Neighbors shared memories of the moment when compassion overcame fear. And Jennifer, each morning as she sipped her coffee, still found herself looking out the window. Not expecting to see her again. But simply remembering. Hope had come in desperation. She had left in strength. And her story, of survival, trust, and the unbreakable bond between humans and the wild, would never be forgotten. The forest had reclaimed her. It had been months since Hope and her cubs had left Jennifer's backyard. Months since she had taken those final steps into the wilderness, guiding her babies into the world they were meant to know. But the town had not forgotten her. They still checked wildlife cameras in the protected area, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bear family they had fought so hard to save. And as the autumn leaves began to fall, those cameras captured something extraordinary. Hope was not only surviving. She was thriving. A mother's lessons. The forest had once been an unforgiving place. The long winter had nearly taken her life, stolen the strength from her body, and left her cubs on the brink of death. But now, the cameras revealed a very different story. Hope's fur was thick again, shining in the sunlight. She moved with power, no longer the starving mother that had once collapsed in Jennifer's yard. And her cubs, now stronger, more confident, were learning how to survive. They climbed trees, wrestled in the fallen leaves, and practiced mock hunting, preparing for the days ahead. The cubs no longer relied on humans for food. Hope had taught them well. The footage made its way back to Jennifer, Sarah, Dr. Chen, and the people of the town. Tears filled their eyes as they watched the cubs, once frail and starving, now running through the woods. Full of life. They had done it. Hope had come for help. But now, she was wild again. And that was exactly how it should be. A silent reunion. Jennifer still found herself walking near the forest in the early mornings. She no longer expected to see Hope. But still, she couldn't help but wonder. One crisp autumn evening, as she sat on her porch, a familiar sound reached her ears. A rustling. A shift in the trees. Her heart pounded. She turned her head, scanning the forest's edge. And then, she saw them. Hope. Standing just beyond the tree line, her powerful body silhouetted by the golden sunset. Her cubs, bigger now, healthier, stood beside her. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. She did not move. She knew this was not the time to step forward. Hope had not come for food. She had not come for help. She had come to show Jennifer something. The cubs. Alive. Strong. Everything a mother could want for her children. It was a moment Jennifer would never forget. She didn't raise her hands. Didn't call out. Instead, she simply watched, her eyes shining with quiet understanding. And then, just as silently as they had appeared, Hope turned, nudged her cubs forward, and disappeared into the woods. A final farewell. A silent thank you. Jennifer wiped away a tear. She whispered into the trees, "Be safe." A town forever changed. Hope's story did not fade. If anything, it became something even greater. The town that had once been just another small dot on the map was now known as a place of compassion. More and more people came to learn about conservation. Schools brought children to see wildlife rehabilitation efforts. Local businesses donated money to protect the forests, ensuring that animals like Hope and her cubs would never go hungry again. Jennifer's home became a small community center for wildlife education. The place where a desperate mother once sought help had now become a place of learning, inspiring generations to come. The cycle continues. Years passed. Hope's cubs grew into young bears, eventually leaving their mother to start lives of their own. And one spring morning, Jennifer received a call from Dr. Chen. "You're going to want to see this," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. A new wildlife camera had captured something unexpected. A young female bear, strong and healthy, with fur as glossy as Hope's had been. And beside her, two tiny cubs, Hope's grandchildren. Jennifer held the photograph in her hands, her heart pounding with disbelief and joy. Hope's legacy was still alive. Her story was still being written. And the cycle, the endless, beautiful cycle of nature, continued. The final lesson. Jennifer stood once more on her porch, looking toward the forest. The trees whispered in the wind, carrying memories of a starving mother bear who had once taken a desperate chance on humans. She had asked for help, and she had been given hope. But the greatest lesson she had left behind wasn't just about survival. It was about trust. About how, sometimes, the most unexpected connections can change everything. And about how a single act of kindness, just one moment of compassion, can create ripples that last for generations. Jennifer smiled, wiping away a single tear. Then, she whispered once more. To the trees, to the stars, and to the wild places where Hope's family still roamed. Thank you. A new dawn in the wild. The forest awoke with the gentle hum of life. Birds sang in the treetops. The wind whispered through the ancient oaks, and the river babbled softly over smooth stones. And somewhere in the heart of the wilderness, Hope stood watching the sunrise. The light caught the sheen of her now glossy black coat, highlighting the powerful muscles beneath. She was no longer the starving mother who had once collapsed in Jennifer's yard. Now, she was a matriarch. A mother who had not only survived but thrived. At her side, her cubs, now nearly grown, stood tall. They had once been frail, on the edge of death. But now, their bodies were strong, their fur thick, their eyes full of wild curiosity. And today was the day she would let them go. Hope had taught them everything she could. How to forage. How to fish in the streams. How to recognize danger in the rustling of the trees. But the time had come for them to walk their own paths. She nudged them gently, one final lesson, one final push toward independence. They hesitated, looking at her with the silent question, "Are we really ready?" Hope chuffed softly. They were. One by one, her cubs stepped forward, slow at first, uncertain. Then, as if sensing the change, they began to run, their paws thudding against the forest floor as they disappeared into the trees. Hope watched them go, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. She was alone again. But this time, it wasn't because of hunger or desperation. This time, she had succeeded. An unbreakable bond. Jennifer hadn't stopped thinking about Hope. It had been nearly a year since the mother bear had returned that one final time, showing her cubs as if to say thank you. Since then, Jennifer had continued working with Dr. Chen and Sarah to expand the town's wildlife conservation programs. They had built a protected wildlife corridor, stretching from the edge of town deep into the forest, ensuring that animals like Hope would always have a safe place to roam. Cameras had been set up along the way, capturing glimpses of the bears, Hope's family. And then, one day, Jennifer got a call. Dr. Chen's voice was almost shaking. "You need to see this." When she arrived at the wildlife station, he was already waiting, staring at a monitor. Jennifer's heart pounded as she followed his gaze. There, on the screen, was Hope. She had grown even stronger since Jennifer had last seen her. But that wasn't what had taken Dr. Chen's breath away. Hope wasn't alone. She had new cubs. Jennifer gasped, covering her mouth. Two tiny, wobbly-legged cubs clung to their mother's side. "She's done it again," Dr. Chen whispered, his eyes shining. Hope had brought a new generation into the world. And this time, she wasn't starving. She wasn't desperate. She was a mother who had learned, adapted, and survived. And Jennifer knew, deep in her heart, that she had made the right choice all those months ago. A town forever changed. The discovery of Hope's new cubs sparked something unprecedented in the community. She had become a symbol of resilience, of second chances. Jennifer, along with Dr. Chen and Sarah, worked tirelessly to expand conservation efforts. Together, they developed wildlife-friendly initiatives. Farmers in the area installed bear-safe composting bins to prevent unnecessary conflicts. Local schools introduced conservation programs, teaching children about the delicate balance of nature. The town's wildlife cameras were now part of an educational project, allowing people to watch Hope's story unfold in real time. And the biggest change of all, a protected wildlife reserve was officially established. It was named Hope's Sanctuary. A permanent safe space where bears, deer, and other wildlife could roam freely, untouched by human interference. Jennifer stood at the opening ceremony, watching as the town gathered in awe. She knew that without Hope, none of this would have happened. One starving mother had changed everything. Hope's cubs learned the wild. In the depths of the forest, Hope was teaching her new cubs how to survive. She led them to the rivers where the fish swam in cool, clear waters. She showed them which berries were safe and which ones to avoid. She let them wrestle and play, knowing that one day, they would need to fight for their place in the wild. And all the while, she watched over them with the quiet strength of a mother who had seen both the cruelty and kindness of the world. One night, as the wind rustled through the trees, Hope looked up toward the sky. The stars shone brightly above her, illuminating the forest in a soft glow. She closed her eyes, breathing in the crisp air. She remembered the night she had made the hardest decision of her life. The night she had stepped out of the wild and into Jennifer's world. And now, years later, she knew it had been the right choice. Her cubs would never know the desperation she had once faced. Because she had fought. Because she had survived. And because a stranger had chosen to help. A final visit. As the first snowfall of the season blanketed the ground, Jennifer walked the edge of the forest. She didn't expect to see Hope. But something deep inside told her to look one last time. And then, through the trees, a shadow moved. Jennifer's breath caught. Hope stepped forward, the fresh snow clinging to her thick coat. And beside her, her cubs. Jennifer felt tears well in her eyes. The cubs were healthy, strong, full of life. And in that moment, she knew. Hope had come to show her. To remind her that the kindness of one person can change the world. Hope met Jennifer's eyes for a long, quiet moment. And then, just like before, she turned, nudging her cubs toward the trees. She disappeared into the wilderness. But her legacy remained. Jennifer stood there for a long time, the snow falling softly around her. Then, she whispered the same words she had said so long ago. "Be safe." And with that, she turned back toward town, her heart full. Hope was home. And she always would be. Hope's cubs begin to roam. As the seasons changed, Hope's cubs grew stronger. No longer the tiny, wobbling creatures that clung to her side, they had become adventurous and full of energy. Each day, she led them through the wilderness, teaching them the ways of the forest. She took them to the river, where they watched her plunge her powerful paws into the water, sending fish scattering in a frenzy. They tried to mimic her. But at first, their clumsy paws came up empty. She guided them through berry patches, where the air was thick with the sweet scent of ripened fruit. She watched as they sniffed cautiously, testing the flavors on their tongues. She let them wrestle and play, their small growls filling the air as they tumbled over each other. It was more than play, it was preparation for the day when they would have to fend for themselves. But Hope was always watching. She kept her ears perked for the sounds of danger, the snap of a branch, the distant call of a predator. Because she knew, one day soon, she would have to let them go. A familiar scent on the wind. One crisp morning, Hope lifted her nose to the air. The scent that drifted toward her was one she had not smelled in a long time. It was human. Her cubs froze, their instincts sharp. They had never been close to humans, only knowing the deep wilderness as their home. Hope hesitated. She had long since returned to the wild, leaving behind the world of humans and the warmth of Jennifer's backyard. But she had never forgotten. Her cubs pressed close to her, their young hearts beating fast. She let out a soft chuff, reassuring them. This scent wasn't a threat. It was a memory. One that had once saved her life. She stood still for a moment, letting the past and present collide. Then, with a deep breath, she turned away, leading her cubs in the opposite direction. She had no reason to return. She had everything she needed right here. But she had a feeling. They had not forgotten her either. Jennifer's new mission. Back in town, Jennifer's life had changed forever. Ever since Hope's story had captured the hearts of millions, her quiet town had become a place of inspiration. The wildlife sanctuary had expanded, drawing in volunteers from across the country. Schools began teaching children about conservation, using Hope's story as a lesson in kindness and respect for nature. Donations poured in, helping protect local forests, rivers, and the animals that called them home. And Jennifer? She had found her calling. She left her old job behind and devoted herself full-time to wildlife conservation. She worked closely with Dr. Chen and Sarah, monitoring bear populations, setting up protected feeding areas far from human settlements, and educating people about how to safely coexist with nature. And yet, she always wondered about Hope. Was she safe? Had she raised her cubs well? Had she truly moved on? Jennifer had seen glimpses of her on the wildlife cameras, but it wasn't the same. She wanted to see her, just once more. The unexpected reunion. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the mountains, Jennifer got a call. It was Sarah. "Jen. You need to get